He shaved off her daughter's hair at school. But when Ronda Rousey arrived, everything changed. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The day began with sunlight pouring over the red-tiled roofs of Hamilton Crest Academy, nestled at the edge of Tucson, Arizona. The early morning was cool for spring, with a faint breeze threading through the palm trees and basketball courts that line the side of the elite campus. Students began trickling through the school's arching gates, clad in uniforms and shades of navy and beige, their backpacks slung low, their conversations casual and sleepy. No one suspected that by midday, something would happen inside the auditorium that would spark outrage across the country. Ronda Rousey, a quiet 14-year-old with almond-toned skin and striking hazel eyes, walked through the front gates with a confidence that didn't come from popularity, but from a quiet understanding of who she was. Her long, intricately braided hair fell down her back in soft cords, a traditional Polynesian style passed down through generations in her family. Today, she had adorned her braids with tiny seashell clips, each one representing an island her grandmother once told her about. It wasn't just a hairstyle. It was a tribute, a living connection to her roots. It was identity. Ronda didn't seek attention. She had learned to make herself small in rooms that didn't understand her. But when she entered the main hallway that morning, her presence turned heads, not because of who she was, but because of what she wore on her head. Principal David Grimes, a man in his early 50s with a tight jaw and a tighter worldview, was exiting the administrative wing just as Ronda passed. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. Grimes had a particular disdain for anything he couldn't label and file neatly into his notion of American normalcy. And this braided crown with cultural ornaments, was not in his comfort zone. He stopped abruptly, arms crossed, intercepting Ronda before she could reach her first period. "Excuse me," he said, voice sharp and public. Several students slowed their pace, sensing tension. Ronda turned, instinctively standing straighter. "Yes, sir?" Grimes gave her a once-over that felt like an audit. "We have rules about hairstyles in this institution." She didn't look away. "It's not against the code, sir. I checked." He smiled, thin and cold. "Come with me." Word traveled fast in private schools, faster still when the student involved was already the subject of hushed hallway admiration. By second period, a buzz had spread through the student body. Ronda Rousey was being reprimanded by the principal. Some thought it was absurd. Others, more cynical, said they saw it coming. Inside the front office, Grimes made her wait. Ronda sat silently, fingers curled into fists in her lap. The secretary avoided eye contact. After what felt like forever, he returned. Not to release her, but to inform her she would be part of a disciplinary assembly scheduled during third period. No further details. No explanation. At 10:50 a.m., the school intercom crackled to life. "All students, please report to the auditorium immediately for an urgent assembly." Students shuffled in, puzzled, whispering among themselves. Teachers stood stiffly at the exits. At the center of the stage stood Principal Grimes, flanked by a small table with a covered box. The lights dimmed. "Ronda Rousey, please come up," he called. A hush fell. Ronda froze in the second row, all eyes turned. Some students looked confused. A few pulled out phones beneath their hoodies just in case. Ronda walked slowly to the stage, her heart pounding. She knew this was about her hair. She didn't know how far it would go. Grimes turned to the crowd. "Today," he began, We confront what happens when rules are ignored and appearance takes precedence over discipline. This is not about race. It's not about culture. It is about standards. Lakea's ears buzzed. Her vision narrowed. Grimes pulled the cloth off the table. On it lay scissors and electric clippers. There was a moment, short, invisible, but seismic, when Lakea realized he wasn't bluffing. "No," she whispered, but Grimes turned toward her. "You've been warned." "I wasn't," she said, louder this time. "No one warned me." He ignored her. "Turn around." She shook her head, stepping back. "You can't do this." "I have every authority," he said, voice rising. "The school handbook clearly states—" "I read it," Lakea said. "It doesn't ban cultural hairstyles." "That's subjective." "No, it's identity." The auditorium held its breath. A teacher near the wings shifted nervously. One of the janitors started to say something, but stopped. Grimes reached for the scissors. "You're making a scene," he muttered. "So are you," she said. But he had already grabbed a braid. The auditorium erupted in gasps as the scissors cut through the first lock of her hair. Then another, and another. The rhythmic snip of metal on hair echoed through the hall. Some students cried out. Others, in shock, held their phones higher. Lakea stood still, stunned, tears building but refusing to fall. Grimes wasn't done. He turned on the clippers. Lakea backed away, but a security guard blocked her path, unsure of what to do. She turned to Grimes, pleading, "Please stop." "I'm stopping the chaos," he snapped and brought the clippers to her head. The loud buzz filled the silence like a chainsaw. Bits of her hair fell like feathers. The ornate seashell clips clattered to the floor. Students began to whisper, some sobbing, some filming. Someone muttered, "This is assault." One brave freshman bolted from the auditorium and sprinted toward the school office. She didn't stop until she found a teacher she trusted, and together they made a call. But they weren't the only ones. One student uploaded the clip to Instagram. Another sent the footage directly to a number listed under emergency contact in the student registry. The name on that contact form? Ronda Jean Rousey. At 11:35 a.m., inside a gym in Los Angeles, Ronda finished her last round of sparring, her shirt soaked with sweat, her breath even. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. One video. No caption. She pressed play. The moment she saw her daughter's face contorted in helplessness, her braids on the floor, and a man with a pair of clippers grinning smugly under stage lights, Rhonda's expression didn't change. She didn't scream. She didn't pace. She walked to her locker, tossed her gloves inside, picked up her keys and said to no one in particular, "Cancel my afternoon." An hour later, the car pulled out of her driveway in Los Angeles and headed east toward Tucson. Back at the school, Lakea was sent home early. No apology, no explanation, just a note saying she had been disruptive. She sat in the passenger seat of a friend's car, her hoodie pulled tight over her shorn head. Her phone buzzed nonstop, but she ignored it. The humiliation was still raw, her scalp stinging, her heart bruised. She didn't know what would happen next, but someone else did. Rhonda didn't need to ask for details. She had seen enough. The GPS said she'd arrive in Tucson by nightfall. She turned the volume down, focused on the road, and whispered only once to herself. They touched the wrong girl. The story was far from over. It was just beginning. The drive to Tucson was long, but Rhonda didn't feel it. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, unblinking, unyielding. The landscape blurred past in shades of orange and gold, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. Every so often, her phone would vibrate in the passenger seat, but she never looked at it. She'd seen all she needed to see. Her daughter's face, half-shaven, eyes full of shock and betrayal, was burned into her mind with a heat no amount of time could cool. She didn't need to scream to know her rage. It sat deep in her chest like a storm, coiled and waiting. She had learned long ago that true power wasn't in the noise, but in the silence that came before the blow. And Ronda Rousey, world champion, Olympian, fighter, wasn't coming for revenge. She was coming for correction. Back in Tucson, the school had attempted to settle into a fragile calm. The administration had called it a disciplinary teaching moment, and Principal Grimes had taken a leave of absence under the guise of cooperating with an internal review. No apology was issued to Lakia. No communication was made to her family, aside from a generic email stating that appropriate conduct was followed. The tone was defensive, dismissive. But outside the school's brick walls, the story had taken on a life of its own. The video clip that first made its way to Instagram had now reached Twitter, TikTok, and even the trending section of YouTube. Hashtags like #JusticeForLakia and #HarrisHerHeritage exploded overnight. Influencers reposted it. Civil rights lawyers commented on it. Parents across the country shared it with their own stories of children being punished for expressing their identity. The public wanted answers, and more than that, they wanted accountability. Ronda reached Tucson by early evening. She didn't stop to rest. She drove straight to her home, a small adobe-style property she kept for when they visited Arizona. Lakia was already there, curled up on the living room couch beneath a heavy fleece blanket, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hoodie was still on. Ronda stepped through the front door silently. She didn't call out. She didn't ask questions. She walked to her daughter and sat beside her. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Lakia turned her head, just slightly, and whispered, "I didn't think he would actually do it." Ronda's jaw tightened, but her hand remained gentle as she reached over and pushed the hood back. The sight of her daughter's unevenly shaven head hit her like a punch, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in and pressed her forehead to Lakia's. "You didn't break," she said quietly. "They wanted to shame you, but you stood." Lakia didn't cry. She had done that already, silently, alone. Now she just leaned into her mother's strength, allowing herself to breathe without fear for the first time in hours. Later that night, Ronda locked herself in the study and began making calls. She contacted her legal counsel, Darla, who had previously worked on public advocacy cases involving student rights. She called Kendra, her former publicist from WWE, and requested a list of sympathetic journalists. Then she made the most important call to Brianna Moore, a civil rights attorney with national reach and a fire for justice that matched her own. Within 2 hours, Ronda had a team assembled. "No lawsuits yet," she instructed them. "First, we show them the truth, and we do it in a way they can't hide from." Meanwhile, the school board scrambled to manage the fallout. Despite the administration's attempts to downplay the situation, the viral spread of the video had ignited fury among parents, students, and faculty alike. Anonymous tips began to surface, stories from other students who had been punished or humiliated for cultural expressions. A teacher reported that Grimes had once forced a Native American student to remove ceremonial beads from his hair during an exam. A former parent mentioned that her daughter, of Somali descent, had been told that her head wrap was distracting and was sent home for the day. The silence that once protected Grimes was cracking. Ronda, meanwhile, crafted her first public statement. She didn't use a fancy studio or a production team. She sat in her backyard, phone propped on a table with La Kea beside her, hood off, head bare, and shoulders squared. The video was only 2 minutes long, but it changed everything. "This is my daughter, La Kea," Ronda began. "She's 14. She's strong. She's smart. And she wore her heritage with pride, but yesterday, someone tried to take that from her." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. A school principal, an adult in power, grabbed scissors and clippers and humiliated her in front of her peers, not because she broke a rule, but because she wore who she is on her head. She paused, then leaned forward. "I've fought in cages, rings, and arenas, but this is a different kind of fight. One I never expected to bring into a school hallway, but now I'm here, and we're not backing down." The video ended with a simple message. To every kid who's ever been told their culture is a problem, you are not the problem. The system is. The video reached 5 million views in 12 hours. By the next morning, Ronda's phone was flooded with messages. Major news outlets requested interviews. Civil rights organizations pledged support. UFC champions reposted her video, adding their own messages of solidarity. WWE superstars like Bianca Belair and Xavier Woods shared their own experiences growing up in schools that policed their appearance. Ronda declined all interviews, not yet. Instead, she prepared for what came next, the return. At Hamilton Crest Academy, the atmosphere had shifted. Students whispered in hallways. Teachers looked uncomfortable. A few stood up and offered quiet apologies to La Kea, though they weren't the ones who needed to. The school board issued a formal notice that an independent review of Principal Grimes's actions was underway, but made no move to offer restitution or apology. Ronda was done waiting. On Wednesday morning, 48 hours after the incident, a black SUV pulled into the faculty lot of the school. Ronda stepped out, dressed not in athletic gear, but in tailored slacks and a fitted jacket, her hair pulled back into a sharp braid. She carried no entourage, no press, just herself and her message. She walked through the school's main entrance with the same poise she carried into octagons and arenas around the world. The secretary stammered a greeting, unsure what to do. Ronda didn't stop. Students saw her first, their phones raised instinctively. They didn't cheer, didn't shout. They simply watched, wide-eyed, as she moved through the corridors like a force of nature. When she reached the administrative wing, she didn't knock. She opened the door. Principal Grimes was back. He had returned early, expecting to assert control. He was in his office, talking to a district official on speakerphone when Ronda walked in. He stood, startled. "Miss Rousey, She closed the door behind her. Outside, students began to gather, unsure of what was about to happen, but knowing they were witnessing something that would not be easily forgotten. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Grimes tried to recover his composure. "This is a private." "You made it public," Ronda said. He hesitated, swallowed. "I acted within the bounds of the school code. This has gotten out of hand." She stepped forward. "What you did was assault a child, my child. You cut her hair on a stage and tried to strip her of her pride. Now we're going to see how it feels when someone cuts into your power." His face turned red. "Are you threatening me?" "No," she said, voice low. "I'm promising you." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a letter, an official complaint filed to the district with the signatures of 25 parents attached. She placed it on his desk. "This is the beginning," she said, "not the end." As she turned to leave, the office door opened. Laakea stood there, her bare head lifted, eyes locked on Grimes. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Ronda placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "They tried to take your crown," she whispered, "but now they're going to watch you rise with it." And together they walked out. Behind them the halls erupted, not in noise but in presence. Students stood taller. Teachers looked each other in the eyes. Something had shifted. The silence was over. The strike had begun. By the following morning, the atmosphere around Hamilton Crest Academy had transformed into something electric. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, like the pressure that builds before a summer monsoon. No one knew exactly what Ronda Rousey planned to do next, but everyone, from students to janitors to board officials, understood that the silence had passed. The world was watching now, and so was the woman who had made a career out of walking into rings and walking out triumphant. The district board had issued a statement overnight, vague and cautious, claiming that the matter was under investigation and urging the public to remain calm. Meanwhile, more students came forward, sharing their own encounters with Principal Grimes over the years. A pattern emerged: small humiliations, forced compliance, administrative overreach disguised as discipline. Laakea's story had simply been the one too cruel, too public, and too symbolic to ignore. In the early hours of that Thursday, Ronda sat quietly at the kitchen table with Laakea. The girl's shaved head no longer looked foreign or vulnerable. It looked defiant. She was dressed in her school uniform, the collar crisp, her back straight, eyes alert. Ronda pushed a warm mug of tea toward her daughter and studied her face. "You sure you want to go in today?" Laakea nodded. "I have to." Ronda accepted the answer without further comment. She wasn't the kind of mother to shelter her daughter from the world. She was the kind who would teach her how to meet it head on. And today, the world was going to meet them both. At precisely 9:45 a.m., Ronda stepped out of her SUV in the school parking lot. She wore no makeup, no designer labels, just dark jeans, a fitted blazer, and a quiet expression that communicated more threat than any shouted word could. She carried nothing in her hands. She didn't need to. What she brought with her was already enough. The front office bustled with false busyness when she entered. The receptionist stood, panic in her eyes. Ronda offered a tight smile. "Is Principal Grimes in?" "He's in a meeting." "I'll wait inside." Without permission, she opened the door to his office and stepped in. The door swung shut behind her. Grimes was seated behind his desk, attempting to appear composed. His eyes flicked up, and the practiced smirk returned to his lips. "Miss Rousey," he said, leaning back in his chair, "still determined to make this into a circus?" Ronda didn't respond immediately. She walked to the chair opposite him and sat, her hands folded in her lap. The room felt tight, the air too still. "You made it a circus," she said, "when you turned discipline into public humiliation." He chuckled, but there was an edge to it now. "Your daughter violated school standards. I applied the necessary correction." "You touched a minor," Ronda said, her voice low, "without consent. You cut her hair in front of the entire student body. You humiliated her. That's not correction. That's assault." Grimes shifted slightly in his seat. "Let's not pretend this is anything other than performative outrage. You're a celebrity. Of course you'll leverage this." "I'm a mother," she said, leaning forward. "And you're a man who hid behind policy to justify your need for control. You tried to erase my daughter's identity. Now I'm here to erase your illusion of power." Before he could respond, there was a knock on the door. A student's voice filtered in. "She's here." Grimes furrowed his brow. The door opened. La'Akea stepped into the office, her shoulders straight, eyes steady. She wore her hoodie down this time, her shorn head fully visible. She held a small object in her hand, a braided strand of her own hair, the shell clip still attached. She said nothing. She walked to her mother's side and set the braid on the desk, right in front of Grimes. He blinked. Ronda stood. "Now we're even," she said. She moved faster than he could react. In one motion, she stepped around the desk, grabbed Grimes by the collar, and pulled him to his feet. His chair shot backward and slammed into the file cabinet. Before he could protest, she turned him, precisely, expertly, and pushed him down against the desktop, holding his wrist behind his back in a clean, professional lock. Not painful, not violent, just enough pressure to make him freeze. "This is what control feels like," she said quietly. "Not force, just certainty." His breath was shallow, panicked. "You'll be arrested." Ronda leaned in close. "Try it. The cameras are already rolling." Unknown to Grimes, several students had their phones out in the hallway, pointed directly through the glass window. The scene was caught from multiple angles. Ronda wasn't hiding. She was demonstrating. She released him. He stumbled back, red-faced, humiliated. "You're going to record a statement," Ronda said, taking his phone from the desk and unlocking the camera. "You're going to tell the truth." "No," he snapped, regaining some of his bluster. Ronda tilted her head. "Then I'll tell it for you, but I guarantee you won't like how I frame it." He hesitated, then, reluctantly, he sat down and hit record. In the video, Grimes admitted to acting alone. He said La'Akea had not broken any specific rule, and that he had made a judgment call he now regretted. The words sounded hollow, but they were enough. Ronda stopped recording and sent the clip to her attorney. Outside the office, students erupted. Phones buzzed. The footage made it to Instagram within minutes. TikTok followed. Hashtags reignited. Grimes stepped out 20 minutes later into a hallway that had changed. No longer lined with quiet kids afraid to speak, it now buzzed with energy, defiance, and unity. He tried to walk with dignity, but his shoulders slumped. An emergency school board meeting was called that afternoon. Ronda didn't attend. She didn't need to. The footage spoke louder than any prepared statement. By sunset, the board released an official statement. Principal David Grimes was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending investigation for misconduct and abuse of authority. That evening, Ronda returned home with La'Akea. They sat on the porch, watching the desert sky darken with stars. "You didn't hit him," La'Akea said. "No." "But you could have." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Ronda smiled softly. "Because showing control is more powerful than proven force." La'Akea leaned against her shoulder. "What happens now?" "Now," Ronda said, "we build something better." And that night, while Grimes made panicked calls to his lawyer and district officials scrambled to contain the story, Ronda drafted the first outline of what would become the Rage Initiative, Rousey Against Gender and Ethnic Profiling, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting students from discrimination, empowering families, and forcing policy change across the nation. She didn't need a ring. The fight was already hers, and it was only just beginning. In the days that followed the confrontation between Ronda Rousey and Principal David Grimes, Hamilton Crest Academy became more than a school. It became a symbol. The footage of the incident, showing the once feared administrator being physically and verbally confronted by the mother of the girl he humiliated, had circulated faster than anyone could have imagined. Mainstream news outlets ran primetime segments dissecting every frame. Morning shows invited psychologists to analyze the cultural implications. Talk radio buzzed with debates. The clip had surpassed the realm of gossip or controversy. It had entered history. But as the world talked, Ronda acted. Within 48 hours of Grimes being placed on administrative leave, Ronda's team announced the launch of the Rage Initiative. What began as an informal meeting in her Tucson living room quickly evolved into a structured campaign. Rage, Rousey against gender and ethnic profiling, was more than a foundation. It was a direct challenge to the silent injustices that had lingered in schools for decades. Backed by attorneys, educators, athletes, civil rights leaders, and parents from across the country, Rage declared its mission: to protect students, reform discipline policies, and root out hidden discrimination masquerading as dress codes and conduct enforcement. Ronda wasn't interested in sound bites. She moved with the focus of a fighter preparing for a title bout. She held roundtable discussions with legislators. She coordinated webinars for educators. She hosted live broadcasts with other parents whose children had faced similar humiliations, some far worse, many unspoken until now. For every loud critic who called her reaction excessive, there were a dozen more voices of gratitude. Mothers wrote letters. Fathers wept on camera. Former students, now adults, shared memories of being forced to cut dreadlocks, remove turbans, or straighten natural hair to look presentable. But while Ronda was focused on national reform, her eyes remained on Hamilton Crest. Laakea, ever more composed, returned to school like a quiet storm. The girl, who once kept her head low, now walked the halls with an ease that came from knowing the tides had shifted. Students looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with respect. Some even began wearing their hair differently, reclaiming what had been stolen from them silently over years of silent compliance. Teachers who had once enforced policies without question now hesitated, considering the cultural cost of every reprimand. The administration, desperate to project control, issued a lukewarm update. The school would review its dress and grooming policies in coordination with district officials. But no apology was given, no restorative action taken. It wasn't enough. Not for Ronda, not for the students, and certainly not for the truth. Then came an invitation, one that caught Laakea by surprise. The student council, emboldened by the events of the past week, requested that she speak at the next school assembly. It was scheduled for Friday morning in the same auditorium where her humiliation had taken place. At first, she refused. The idea of standing on that stage again, even under different circumstances, felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to scab. But Ronda, ever patient, sat beside her daughter on the porch that evening and said, "That stage took something from you. It's time to take it back." And so, on a morning flooded with nervous anticipation, Laakea stood behind the closed curtain of the Hamilton Crest Auditorium. Her speech was folded in her hand, but she didn't look at it. Instead, she focused on breathing, deep and steady, the way her mother taught her before every difficult moment. The same breath Ronda used before stepping into the ring. The curtains opened. A hush fell over the crowd. Laakea stepped forward. She didn't read from the page. She didn't need to. With her head held high and her voice unwavering, she spoke. 10 days ago, I stood on this stage and was told my identity didn't belong here. I was told that my hair, my culture, was a problem. I was silenced. I was shaved. But I wasn't erased, because everything they tried to cut away only grew back stronger. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd of students, many of whom were silently wiping their faces. You may have seen me as a victim, but I'm not. I'm a reminder that our stories matter, that our hair matters, that no rule should be written to erase who we are. By the time she finished, the auditorium wasn't loud. It was still, reverent. Teachers stood, students rose. The quiet was louder than any applause could be. That night, Ronda watched the replay of her daughter's speech from her hotel room in Los Angeles. She had flown out that afternoon to speak with state legislators about expanding the Crown Act, the law that protected natural and cultural hairstyles from discrimination, to school districts that had resisted its reach. The timing couldn't have been better. The news cycle had shifted in her favor. Every major network now referred to the incident not as a celebrity outrage, but as a civil rights reckoning. Politicians lined up to be photographed with Ronda and LaKea. The Department of Education announced it would review national guidelines for school grooming policies. Momentum was on their side. But Ronda had learned enough in her life to know that momentum alone didn't guarantee victory. Systems had a way of reconstituting themselves, hiding behind new faces and bureaucratic language. She knew they weren't done yet. Her instincts were proven right when she received a call from her attorney, Darla, the next morning. "He's trying to install his brother." Ronda blinked. "Who is?" "The board. There's a motion to appoint an interim principal while the investigation continues. David Grimes' younger brother, Matthew Grimes, is being considered. They're claiming he's qualified, has a clean record, and no connection to the incident." Ronda stood up from her seat. Her voice was low, measured. "Get me everything on him." Within hours, Darla delivered a sealed report. Matthew Grimes had indeed worked at a private school in Florida. His record appeared spotless on the surface, but buried in the HR files, locked behind non-disclosure clauses and sealed settlements, was a complaint filed by the parents of a black student who had been expelled for gang-like presentation. The student had worn locks and a Pan-African necklace. The case was settled quietly. No admission of guilt, no public record. Ronda held the report in her hands and felt the familiar heat rise in her chest. She knew this playbook. They would swap the face, change the nameplate, and continue the same abuses in quieter ways. But not this time. She and Darla scheduled a meeting with Superintendent Ramos. When they arrived, Ronda placed the report on her desk and slid it across. "You told us this school was changing," she said. "You said you wanted better. That starts by not putting the same poison in a new bottle." Ramos, visibly shaken, read the report in silence. Her shoulders sagged. "Give me 24 hours," she said. But they didn't need 24. By the next afternoon, word spread through the faculty lounge that Matthew Grimes had arrived for a tour. His manner was smooth, his smile polished. But the students noticed something else, the glint in his eyes that mirrored the same superiority his brother wore like armor. He walked the halls with confident steps, but those steps were watched. Later that evening, at a staff-only meeting, Matthew made a mistake. Believing himself safe, he reportedly joked that the school had become a theater for social justice performances, and that it was time to bring discipline back to the circus. His words were met with a few chuckles, then silence. One teacher, a Latina woman who had taught at the school for over 10 years, discreetly recorded the comment on her phone. The clip was only 25 seconds long, but it was enough. By morning, the video had leaked. Once again, social media caught fire. Hashtags flared anew. #Grimes2 trended by noon. Students walked out of class and held signs. One read, "One Grimes was enough." Another, You can't cut what we've already grown back. That afternoon, the school board convened a second emergency meeting. This time, Rhonda was there. So was Laakea. So were the students, hundreds of them. As the board reviewed the clip and read the sealed HR complaint Rhonda's team had unearthed, it became clear there was no path forward for Matthew Grimes. No amount of credentials could scrub away what he had said, or what his past had concealed. The decision came swiftly. Matthew Grimes' appointment was terminated. His file would be flagged across the district. The board, now fully aware of public scrutiny, voted to bring in a vetted interim leader approved by an external equity team. As Rhonda and Laakea exited the building, the crowd outside parted to let them through. There were no cheers, no chants, just a quiet kind of triumph, the kind that lingers in the bones. They had broken the wall. Now it was time to build something better. The sun rose over Hamilton Crest Academy with a new clarity. The courtyard, once pristine and silent, was now alive with murals painted by students celebrating culture, resilience, and identity. The walls no longer felt like barriers, they felt like canvases. And yet, despite the visual transformation, the air carried the weight of something unfinished. The board had removed 2 Grimes brothers in the span of a month. The students had reclaimed their power. Policies were under review, and the national conversation had shifted toward the schools that for years had punished individuality in the name of order. But Ronda Rousey knew better than anyone that victory declared too soon was just an invitation for old wounds to fester. She remained vigilant. While the local victory had been powerful, she had set her sights beyond Hamilton Crest. With rage now gaining national traction, her calendar filled with meetings, speeches, and hearings. Civil rights leaders called. Educators from other districts reached out. State representatives wanted to co-sponsor what was now being drafted into formal legislation, the Laakea Amendment. A proposed bill to protect cultural expression in all public schools and penalize institutions that enforced discriminatory grooming codes under the guise of policy. Laakea traveled with her mother to Washington, D.C. for a hearing, invited as a youth advocate to testify in front of the Senate Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Education. She had never been to the Capitol before. The white pillars, the echo of marble under her sneakers, the gaze of men and women in tailored suits, it all should have been overwhelming, but it wasn't. The stage had changed, but the message hadn't. She walked into the chamber with her shoulders high, her buzzed head bare and proud. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Activists, reporters, and educators filled every seat. Laakea sat behind the microphone and unfolded a piece of paper with her statement, but she didn't read it. She looked up and began to speak from her heart. 3 months ago, I was made to feel small in front of an entire school, not because I broke a rule, but because I honored my heritage. I wore my grandmother's culture in my hair, and, for that, an adult in authority cut it off without my consent. He said it was about standards, but it was about power and identity and control. She paused, her hands still, her voice clear. I didn't come here today to shame schools. I came here because I believe they can be better. I believe students can be protected. And I believe that what happened to me should never happen to anyone else. Not ever. By the time she finished, the room had grown still, not out of silence, but reverence. A senator leaned forward, visibly moved. An educator in the second row wiped away tears. Her words, simple and firm, had cut through layers of politics and rhetoric. She wasn't asking for attention, she was commanding it. Later that evening, back at the hotel, Rhonda wrapped her arms around her daughter on the balcony and looked out over the lights of D.C. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. What needed to be said had already been shared with the world, but the world still wasn't done pushing back. 2 weeks later, a sealed envelope arrived at their Tucson home. Inside, a formal notice from a private attorney representing David Grimes. It was a lawsuit filed against Ronda, Laakea, and the Rage Initiative, alleging defamation, emotional distress, and abuse of celebrity status. The claim argued that Ronda had used her public platform to destroy a man's career and reputation for personal gain, and that Laakea had intentionally provoked discipline to initiate a media frenzy. Ronda didn't yell. She didn't pace. She read the papers, placed them on the kitchen table, and picked up the phone. "Darla," she said calmly, "he wants a war. Let's give him a lesson instead." But Darla was already ahead of her. "We have 3 choices. We can litigate, we can settle, or we can shut it down before it ever breathes." Rhonda smiled faintly. "I like door number 3. A private mediation meeting was scheduled in Las Vegas. No cameras, no reporters, just 2 men and 2 lawyers. Grimes arrived looking thinner, worn, and far from the man who had once ruled a school auditorium with unchecked arrogance. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at Rhonda, the fury simmering behind his eyes. "You ruined me," he finally spat. "You turned me into a monster." "You did that yourself," Rhonda replied. "I just made sure everyone saw it." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lawyer placing a hand on his arm. "You think you're a hero?" he snapped. "You think that speech changes anything? You're not above the law." "No," she said calmly. "I'm inside it now, and I brought a flashlight." She reached into her briefcase and slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were printouts of internal emails between Grimes and faculty, some recovered by whistleblowers, others leaked by former colleagues. There were racist remarks, instructions to discourage hairstyles that suggest nonconformity, photos of students targeted unfairly, testimonies, signed affidavits, recordings. "You sue me," Rhonda said, her voice low, "and I release this, not just to your board, but to every school in this country, every district, every parent who ever trusted someone like you to educate their child." Grimes stared at the folder. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders slumped. The lawsuit was dropped that afternoon, but Rhonda didn't stop. She understood now that the fight was not just for her daughter. It was for every child who had ever been told to change who they were to be accepted. The Rage Initiative expanded its reach. Schools in 6 states implemented new dress code policies drafted in partnership with her team. Workshops for teachers on cultural literacy became mandatory. A national summit was scheduled, and the keynote speaker was named, Laakea. Back at Hamilton Crest, a new principal was appointed. Denise Carter, a black woman with 30 years in education reform, took the helm. Her first act, creating a student-led equity council to ensure that the voices of those most affected by school policy were heard. Her second act, commissioning a mural at the entrance of the school, painted by the students themselves. It showed a girl with a shaved head standing in the middle of a circle of students of every race, every gender, every culture. Above her were the words, "Our voices are not violations." They titled it Aria. On the day of the mural's unveiling, the auditorium was packed. Teachers, parents, students, and even reporters gathered. Laakea stepped onto the stage once more, not to protest, but to inspire. "You know who I am," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "But this isn't about me anymore. It's about the next kid who walks into this school with braids or beads or scars or silence and wonders if they belong. I didn't start this to go viral. I started this because someone took my hair and gave me something louder. She touched the microphone gently, then stepped back. The applause was thunderous, but she didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled at her mother, sitting in the back row with tears in her eyes and pride in her chest. Later that night, a call came from Washington. La'Akea had been named Youth Advocate of the Year by the National Education Alliance. Her name would appear in the official documentation of the La'Akea Amendment as it was submitted for a vote in 6 states. The voice they had tried to silence was now shaping policy. On the back porch that night, under a sky full of stars, La'Akea leaned her head on Ronda's shoulder. "Do you think it's over now?" she asked softly. Ronda smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's head. "No," she said, "but you made sure the next fight will be easier for someone else. That's how change works." The stars didn't blink. They simply burned, and so did she. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for powerful stories like this one, and share this with someone who needs to see it.